Hi friends, Ashley from Wildwoods&Homestead. I put together another video, and in this video I am sharing how I make a fermented salsa. I'm also sharing how we ferment our chicken feed and why we do that, as well as how we feed it to our chickens. As well, in this video I am sharing the continued progression of our Jalapeno greenhouse. We are hoping that this greenhouse becomes a space that we can grow our food year-round, even throughout winter. Over the summer, Geoff was finally able to figure out a cooling system, get that ordered, and get it built into the space. And now he's working on a heating system using our outdoor off-grid wood burner. So I share a little bit about that in this video as well. I hope that you will join me if you have a few moments. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started right into this salsa. And I apologize if I sound a little breathless. I am bouncing a baby and trying to get her to sleep. So for the salsa, I did not follow any particular recipe. Basically, for every 1 quart of mixed vegetables, I added in 1 tablespoon of sea salt, 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of apple cider vinegar, and 1 teaspoon of organic sugar. For my vegetables, I just used what I had on hand. I had some tomatoes, some onion, some red and green peppers, and some jalapeno peppers. This was definitely a salsa that was lighter on the tomatoes and heavier on the peppers, but it still fermented beautifully and it still tasted delicious. I think fermenting vegetables is a great way to get probiotics into your diet. I have also read that fermenting food increases the bioavailability of the nutrients, of the vitamins that are in the food. So as much as I can, I do try to ferment our foods. I have done fermented carrots, apples, onions, peppers. We drink kombucha regularly that I ferment. I used to do water kefir, but I have not since been able to keep up on that, but I do think water kefir is another wonderful probiotic beverage that you can get into your diet. And then, of course, apple cider vinegar is full of nutrients and B vitamins. So I feel that this is a worthy task to take on, and it's something that I try to do on a regular basis, depending on what kinds of vegetables that I have on hand. Because I had a lot of veggies that were conducive to more like a salsa flavor with all of these peppers, I decided that this time I would make a salsa, and it turned out really great despite the fact that I did not have a whole lot of tomatoes on hand. I forgot to mention too that had I had cilantro on hand, I definitely would have added that to this. I love fresh cilantro, especially in salsa. It has such a light, lemony, crisp flavor. However, all of the cilantro in my garden has bolted by now. So I did have some coriander seeds on hand, and I ended up adding those to the entire batch of veggies once I got them all chopped. I also shared in the beginning of this video just pouring some boiling water, and that's just how I sterilize my jars and my lids. Just by pouring some boiling water into my jars and then putting my lids into a glass bowl and then pouring the boiling water into the glass bowl and filling it so that I'm covering the lids with that boiling water to make sure that everything is sanitized. I also sanitize my cutting board, my knife, basically anything that I am going to have come in contact with the vegetables as I'm working. I also then make a brine because it's really important that your vegetables are completely covered in a brine. And for my brine, I do 1 quart of water to 1 tablespoon of sea salt. and then I just pour that over my veggies. And then I had a little fermenting weight there. It just helps to keep the veggies submerged under the brine. I did have some veggies float to the top, but I didn't have any issues with mold. I had this sitting out on my kitchen counter for about a week, and our kitchen has been quite warm. So I think if there was any contamination, I think that I would have seen it in the form of mold within that time frame. Something in regard to mold and ferments. Years ago, I was told that if you have mold on top of your ferment, that it was okay to just scrape the mold aside and still consume the ferment. And there was a time where I did that, thinking that that was okay. However, I did run across a woman's blog where she decided to test that. And she tested the mold at the top of the ferment, and then she tested throughout the entire ferment and found that these strains of mold were actually running throughout the ferment, even though you couldn't see the mold. So ever since I read that, if I find any mold on top of my ferments, unfortunately, I do just put those in my compost, and it's very sad. But I would rather be safe than sorry. But for the most part, I find fermenting drinks and fermenting vegetables and fruits to be very forgiving and a very easy and worthwhile task to do. Now I'm just sharing how we ferment our chicken grain, and it's very similar to how I did my fermented salsa. We just have these 2 5-gallon buckets. We fill those with our dry grain, put in a splash of apple cider vinegar just to kickstart the growth of good bacteria, and then we fill it with water and just make sure that the grain is completely submerged in the water so that we don't get mold growth. And we just alternate between the 2 buckets. The bucket at the back is always the one that we're filling and fermenting, and then the one at the front we're drawing from, and then we just, when that front bucket is empty, we refill it and we switch the buckets. When we ferment the grain, I do find that we save quite a bit on feed. I have read that it is best to feed chickens 1/2 cup of dry grain per bird, but when you ferment your grain, you can do 1/4 cup per chicken. So when we are diligent on fermenting our grain, I do find that I am not buying it as much. I also find that my chickens' immune systems seems to be a lot healthier. Their molting periods seem to be less intense, and they lay really well even in our darker, colder months of the year. So as we head into colder weather here, I do plan to move that system into the shop. I'm just not exactly sure how I'm going to do that, but I do think it's a worthwhile task to do because it's healthier and more cost efficient. The grain does, when you do this, it does bubble up, and it's really active, and that's what you want to see. It kind of smells like sourdough bread. And I did used to actually do this task in my laundry room, and I actually had such a great ferment going that it bubbled up and over the bucket and down into my in-laws' house. They built a in-law suite at the end of our house, and it just leaked all the way down there and through the walls, and it was such a mess, and they were so gracious about it. And so having experienced that, I am trying to figure out what I can do for fermenting it in the shop, and keeping a consistent temperature so that we can continue doing that all year. And now I'm moving on to some greenhouse work. This is something I've never been able to do before. I am actually moving things from outside to inside to see if I can extend my growing season. On this day, I had roses outside, and I wasn't sure how they would do in our winters, so I decided to bring those into the greenhouse and see if they might do well in there, because not only do I just love growing roses, I also like to harvest the petals for tea, and I also use those in my soaps. I also brought in some onions because I knew that those needed a lot longer to finish growing. So I wondered if they might do well in the greenhouse around the roses. And I also brought some strawberries in. I do have strawberries grow really well outdoors here, but I did wonder if I could get those to continue growing inside of the greenhouse. My daughter took this part of the video, so she was just having fun going around and showing some of the neat things that we have currently growing, which leads me to the next part of my video, which is talking about how we are trying to control the climate in this space. So this is our summer climate control. When the greenhouse reaches a certain temperature, these louvers open, and then the fan at the other end of the greenhouse turns on, replaces all of the air. Once the greenhouse reaches the temperature that we want it to, the louvers close and the fan turns off. We have only had that system going since the end of the summer, but we have found that it has made a significant difference in how things are growing out there. It's actually been quite surprising. I didn't think we would see that big of a difference just by installing the fan system, and that's been really encouraging. Now Geoff is winterizing the greenhouse so that we can try to grow throughout the year as well. And he is lining the walls with these galvanized sheets, cutting those, and we're using that to reflect the sunlight. And then we have an off-grid wood burner, and we use that to heat our water, our in-floor heat, and it runs our furnace. It runs our furnace. These are the lines leading from the wood burner that's outside, and I'm going to do my best to explain this. I have asked him a lot of questions. I have tried to watch him closely and figure out what it is that he's doing. The system is kind of complicated, but at the same time, sort of simple. I know that seems very contradictory. But basically the rack that he was building there, he is mounting to the outside to the wall in the greenhouse here. And then he is mounting fans to that rack there. The orange lines inside of the greenhouse will have water and glycol that will run from the wood burner into the shop and into radiators on the side of the walls of the shop. That will heat the shop space. And all of that will just be heated with that wood burner. So with the fuel we are using is wood that we are harvesting from our acreage. And for the greenhouse, those orange lines run into the wall here from the other side. And the fans will turn on and blow the heat into this space. We are not sure what temperature we can sustain in this space, especially as we head into the colder parts of our winter. Typically January and February are our harshest months. So we don't know if we are only extending our growing season or if we can actually grow even in the winter. So my plan for now is to harvest out my summer greenhouse beds. I have a lot of tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, a lot of those hot types of crops in here. And I am going to just go ahead and harvest all of those out. And then I'm going to go ahead and plant a winter greenhouse. I'm going to try to just do those winter hardy plants such as onion, cabbage. I have a few other ideas, and that's going to just be my experiment. And this year I am just trying to find peace in the fact that I am going to be doing this and I'm going to have a huge learning curve. And that's okay, because once I get it figured out, then I can go off of a schedule and off of a system, which I find to be really reassuring, especially with such a large family, to have experience to draw from and then a plan that I can write out based off of that experience. But right now I have to gain the experience. So that's what I wanted to share today. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you guys joining us, and I hope that you'll stick around. Thanks.